Hello, I'm Janet Harris, President of the Indiana Council on World Affairs. This evening, we continue our Great Decisions series with the sixth of eight Foreign Policy Association's topics for 2026. Again, our topic, nuclear proliferation, is in the news with the Trump administration's Department of War's bombing of Iran's nuclear capabilities, a war to stop a nuclear war. Here to introduce the speaker and moderator for this topic is Dr. Betty Tonsing, Indiana Council on World Affairs Vice President for Programs, who with council members organizes this Great Decisions series. Dr. Tonsing.
Thank you, Janet. I'm going to ask those, excuse me, who have not yet turned on your video, if you would please turn that on if you can. Our speaker loves to speak to you. They like to see you, and that would be great. That's much more, they like to see you, just like we're back in person in a regular audience. If you've ever done any speaking before these Zoom audiences, and you're speaking to a name and they like to see you, and I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. This is a really important topic tonight. Some of the questions that you might have related to this: why does Japan still not have a nuclear weapons? Remember, they were asked after World War II to just give up their entire military. Ukraine gave up their nuclear capability as an agreement that Russia will not intervene, yet they did. Does having nuclear capability protect nations from attacks? What if another ally is attacked? Will the US be a supportive ally? Will Americans stand for our using our own capability in defense of our allies? And was Iran really on the edge of having such nuclear capability as is being claimed? There's going to be a lot of solid questions tonight. We're anxious to get going. We have a wonderful expert with us this evening. Dr. Stephen Hall is an associate professor of political science at Ball State University. His teaching explores the global dynamics through courses in international relations and international security, and including whether the U.S. will protect its allies under its nuclear umbrella. His research focuses on international political economy with attention to economic development and transnational capital flows. He is a recipient of the Cohen Peace Fellowship from Ball State, the Fisher Fellowship, Ball State University, and the Humane Studies Fellowship, Institute of Human Studies. He has a PhD and MA in political science from the University of North Carolina, and from the University of Virginia in economics and foreign affairs. And our moderator this evening is a fellow alumni of his from the University of Virginia, as we just discovered this evening. This is Dr. Ken Holland, who's President Emeritus of the American University of Afghanistan, served as the university's president for several years. He's an adjunct professor of political science at the University of Utah, and the discussion of nuclear weaponry is a key part of any foreign policy discussion. He served as chief of party with USAID and a consulting contractor for NATO, the Department of Defense, World Bank, and Department of State on matters of higher education and building the rule of law. So, in addition to that, Ken is also a fellow board member, but a really accomplished moderator for this particular discussion this evening. So I welcome Ken to begin this program with Dr. Hall.
Yeah, welcome everyone. I think we all agree that this is one of the most timely and important topics that we could address here with the Great Decisions program. And it's really my pleasure to turn over the microphone to Steve Hall. And after Steve completes his presentation, I have a few questions that I will pose to him. And then about 10 minutes until 8, we will begin opening up the platform to you, the audience, so you can ask questions directly of Steve. So Steve, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Holland and colleagues, for the invitation to speak with you tonight. And thanks to the audience for showing up on a Tuesday night to talk about proliferation. I'm going to get this presentation. And after this many years of doing Zooms, I'm still going to struggle making sure that it shares, but bear with me and we'll get there. Okay, are we all seeing the presentation then? Yes. Um, okay, so I'm going to I know we have I'm told we have a very well-versed and engaged audience. So, for many of you, some of the things I'm about to go through will be familiar. But I wanted to start by sharing some basic details and some concepts from international relations and strategic studies that help me think about questions associated with nuclear weapons and proliferation. Okay, so let's see. All right, here we go. I thought this would be a good place for us to start, just to get the lay of the land in terms of who has what. So if we're going to have a discussion of nuclear proliferation, we're talking about 9 nuclear powers. The United States, obviously the first to go nuclear. Russia, the United States and Russia collectively hold roughly 90% of the world's nuclear warheads. But China, of course, not surprisingly, a later entrant, but rapidly entering the fray. China's adding about 100 warheads per year if we believe the estimates that we're getting. These estimates are from SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. In addition to these powers, we have the UK, France, Pakistan and India, and Israel. And North Korea, of course. So we have 9 nuclear states, 9 declared states with in possession of nuclear weapons. So to start with, I want to introduce a few concepts that I use to think about the decision to build nuclear weapons. And these concepts come from discussions that happened in the 1950s. So if you go back to the idea of strategic studies, prior to the 1950s, you're really talking about military, right? You're talking about war college kinds of discussions. But then nuclear weapons come along, and we're in a nuclear situation where all of this has to occur on paper. All of these, all the discussions, all the modeling, all of the thinking about potential consequences have to occur on paper because we've never seen nuclear war before beyond Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And because it's in a sense unthinkable. So that's when you really get the evolution of strategic studies as an academic, a part of an academic field, as a civilian academic field. You get the RAND Corporation, where a lot of the folks I'm going to talk about are associated with. So let's start with the idea of Hobbesian fear. So let's go way back to the beginning. Thomas Hobbes, foundational thinker for international relations. So we're concerned about nuclear weapons because it speaks to violent death. It speaks to the fear that individuals and states have that in an anarchic and chaotic world, at any time, violent death can be visited upon you. Nuclear weapons give our potential adversaries a nearly infinite ability to coerce. But then the acquisition of nuclear weapons gives us the ability to resist with impunity. So what that leads to, according to John Hertz in 1950s, is a situation that scholars refer to as the security dilemma. So I'm afraid for my security. I'm a state that wants to live to the next year. What do? I build weapons to protect my security. You, however, are my neighbor. You build weapons, you see me building weapons, and your natural response is to feel afraid, to feel that Hobbesian fear as well. You build weapons too. Where are we at the end of the story? We are neither one of us anymore secure, and we are both the poorer for it as we've engaged in that expenditure. And this last insight from Butterfield in 1951, I think, is important for this discussion. A key part of this security dilemma is what Butterfield calls the inability to enter another's counterfear. In other words, we see other states building weapons, and we can only view this as a threat. We can only view this as an aggressive maneuver, that we can only view this as potentially threatening our interests, rather than entering that other state's counterfear, that other state's Hobbesian fear, that other state's fear of destruction, and saying states are pursuing security, and developing weapons is a natural extension of that. And that'll be important when we talk about some particular states that have acquired or attempted or are attempting to acquire nuclear weapons. Okay, so now let's say, gosh, nuclear weapons are out there in the world. Are we better off if both states have the nuclear weapons? So the security dilemma says, you have two states building nuclear weapons. That's suboptimal because you get the diversion of resources that could be better spent elsewhere into the development of weapons. But perhaps we are in some ways better off. And there's one version of thinking that way that we're all familiar with. Oppenheimer, in a speech in 1953 to the Council of Foreign Relations, calls the problem two scorpions in a bottle. So in the Truman administration, there was a thought that as the United States had been the initial acquirer of nuclear weapons, we gained this sort of ability to coerce with impunity. Oppenheimer says, well, gosh, the Russians already have them. They're bound to acquire delivery capability soon enough. So yes, you could use nuclear weapons, but you are like two scorpions in a bottle, each capable of killing the other, but only at the risk of his own life. That evolves into the term of art that we use now is mutually assured destruction. So no one will use nuclear weapons because I know if I use nuclear weapons, you will use them too. So no one uses them, right? Now, if we adopt this position, if we look at nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons proliferation this way, we say, well, gosh, nuclear weapons are potentially a good thing because you're not going to get any direct military confrontations. So the Cold War is marked by the near absence of direct military confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. You have this mutually assured destruction. The Cold War indeed stays cold. Okay, so that would be one argument for nuclear weapons proliferation, potentially a good thing. But there's an alternative. And the alternative is what Wohlstetter called the delicate balance of terror. So in the 1950s, Rand Corporation scientists, academics, strategic thinkers start to question this idea of, is it really the case that we can expect mutually assured destruction to hold? And what are the assumptions that we're building that on? We're building that on the idea that states are delicately attuned to one another, that there are no miscalculations, when in fact what we see is rife evidence of miscalculations between states. Many of you are probably very familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis. On October 27th of 1962, a U-2 spy plane out of Alaska strays into the Soviet Union, is chased out by MiGs, prompting JFK to observe there's always some son of a bitch who doesn't get the message. And that's a reminder to us that we expect mutually assured destruction to work. We expect the two scorpions not to attack. But what if a plane strays across Soviet airspace and it's taken as the first step towards war? So there's the risk of miscalculation. There are potential weaknesses in command and control. So if I don't think that I can get my orders out to the second strike, that I can send orders out to my missiles to launch in response, and my adversary, are aware of that, that creates a potentially destabilizing situation. And that's obviously the one that is parodied in Dr. Strangelove, the idea that as a result of this, we start to build systems that potentially ensure response and systems that can potentially get out of our control. Thomas Schelling at the Rand Corporation realizes the irrationality of revenge, the irrationality of, if missiles are in the air and coming towards me, it's maybe not rationally for me to press the button and respond and to have that second strike. Now, if that's true and you know that, I'm in a bit of a jam because now maybe you fire the missiles thinking that I won't fire back. And Schelling actually proposes or posits this idea of the threat that leaves something to chance. In other words, this kind of idea of we'll engage in brinksmanship because you could potentially provoke a nuclear response from me, and that'll have to be a part of that uncertainty, that probabilistic element will have to be a part of this, again, delicate balance of terror. And then obviously another part of this delicate balance idea and our concern about nuclear weapons is, what if we introduce the idea of rogue actors? So the rogue actor in Dr. Strangelove is General Jack D. Ripper, and who wants to start a nuclear war, but the rogue actor potentially is Iran, or the rogue actor is potentially North Korea. So if we encounter actors that we think won't respond to the rational incentives faced by the two scorpions in the bottle that might have annihilationist reasons to use nuclear weapons, that is destabilizing, that raises this concern. Okay, so what you think about proliferation, what you think about weapons getting out there and into many hands, depends on which model of the world that you adopt, which model you think is more accurate in explaining the strategic balance that we encounter with nuclear weapons. So the question then is, okay, is non-proliferation good? Is it good for everyone? Or is it maybe just good for us? Maybe just good for the United States? Initially in the post-war period, it looks like non-proliferation is something that the world thinks will be good for everyone. So with the development of the Global South, the non-aligned movement, here you see the first meeting of the non-aligned movement in Bandung in 1955, a set of Global South leaders coming together to saying we're looking at this conflict between East and West, between the United States and the Soviet Union. We want no part of it. And moreover, we want no part of the nuclear risk that it's creating. So you get this sort of concerted message that we not only want none of this East-West conflict, we want no nuclear weapons. So there's a concerted message coming out, no nuclear weapons, the idea that that would be best for the world. And here's an example of what that might look like. So you see in South America, Argentina and Brazil in the late 1970s, they have existing antagonisms. They both have nuclear programs, albeit in the very early stages. But by the mid-1980s, they are able to mutually agree not to pursue them. They both cut the programs off. So there's a view then that the world would be better off with fewer nuclear weapons. But then what do we see developing countries going out and doing? Right there in the Bandung conference picture, we see Nehru. India, and I'll talk about the non-proliferation agreement in a moment, India doesn't sign on. Instead, India preserves the right to pursue nuclear weapons. Pakistan follows suit. We see nuclear weapons in places like North Korea. We see the development of nuclear weapons in Pakistan. And I think if I were to take a show of hands, I think a lot of folks perhaps in the audience would raise concern about states like this developing for nuclear weapons. And that would probably be, again, rooted in the sort of delicate balance of terror perspective on proliferation and what it means. But then consider others who didn't or who did pursue nuclear weapons but didn't get them. So here we have Gaddafi up top. Here we have Saddam Hussein down at the bottom. And they both ended, these are nicer pictures than what I could have offered. They both ended, their lives ended badly. And the folks in North Korea, the folks in Pakistan might well argue that that's good evidence that a small state has a very strong incentive to acquire nuclear weapons to avoid this potential infinite coercion. Okay, so here's the payoff then. If we think that nuclear proliferation is bad either globally or bad for perhaps the United States because it makes us less safe, it prevents us from coercing our adversaries and prevents us potentially from coercing our allies, what options are available to us? What can we do about it? And these are the options that are on the table. We can rely on norms. So norms in international relations theoretically function the same way that norms do in regular social relations. They're shared understandings of what constitutes acceptable behavior. So if you look at nuclear weapons, they haven't been used since 1945, obviously, in an offensive situation. But there are certainly situations where they could have been used between the United States and Vietnam in the Gulf War. They could have been used by the UK on Argentina in the Falklands conflict. So there are situations where you didn't have this delicate balance of terror, where you didn't have mutually assured destruction. Why were they not used? Maybe states respond to norms. Maybe we can rely on that. After all, South Africa was a nuclear power, but in 1989, they dismantled their 6 nuclear weapons. Well, why? At least some portion of the reason is they want to look like a good state that behaves in the right way at a time where they're obviously behaving badly in other ways. Norms are one solution. Problem is, norms are fairly easy to violate, right? Look at North Korea. Treaties are another solution. So the Non-Proliferation Treaty is created in 1968. The five initial powers, nuclear powers, agree to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. There are about 60 original signatories. I think there are about 190 parties to the agreement now. And so we could say, well, gosh, maybe one solution to this proliferation problem is to have the great powers come in and say, we will make sure that you're not subject to the security dilemma by enforcing effectively an agreement between the two of you as smaller states, subsidiary states, not to build the weapons. Problem again, what happens if I violate the treaty? Right? So North Korea is an original signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. North Korea in 2003 drops out. By 2006, they're testing weapons. Again, probably in the audience, we know where that goes. A third solution is rather than thinking in terms of collective regulation, thinking in terms of individual states' self-interest for that Hobbesian fear problem, right? What if I can rely on alliance? What if I'm an alliance partner of the United States and I say, I don't have to build weapons, perhaps I'm Japan, I don't have to build weapons because I can rely on the United States to come to my aid. I can rely on a blanket of nuclear protection. Problem with that, of course, is that I'm relying on another state, right? What if the state doesn't follow through? What if there are reliability problems? What if the state's interests itself, the nuclear blanket state, are compromised? So that's the strategic problem for the United States in the latter half of the Cold War. We want to protect Western Europe, but will we really go into a nuclear war over Western Europe once the Soviets acquire that mutually assured destruction capability? That puts Western European states in a very tough situation and leads to different kinds of politics there. More recently, we're probably all familiar with sanctions. Okay, you have a state that's developing a nuclear program. You can use sanctions on them. Sanctions are very rarely effective, and they've certainly not been effective at slowing down. They weren't effective at stopping Pakistan. The United States is well aware, as you can see in the picture here, going back to the 70s, the development of Pakistan's weapons program. We have this problem. We want to keep them as an ally because they're in a nice part of the world for us to have allies in and have air bases. But we support the NPT, so we spend a lot of the 90s taking away their foreign aid, and then the global war on terror comes and we give it back. Essentially, sanctions didn't work in stopping them from doing that. Finally, the last one, and I think I'm right at 725, so this is good. Armed intervention. If all else fails, use military force. So perhaps that's some of the motivation for what we're seeing in Iran. Iran enriches, we have a nuclear deal in 2015 that's supposed to keep enrichment down to 3%. Trump pulls out of the nuclear deal. Biden tries to renegotiate, but by 2020, 2021, Iran is reaching to 60%. From 60%, 90%, which is weapons grade, is a hop, skip, and a jump. So what do? We bomb. So 725, I'll stop there and I'll open to Dr. Holland's questions. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Steve. That was really an excellent introduction and overview of the issues that we face and trying to understand the issue of nuclear proliferation. So I've got a few questions to pose to you. The first one is, if U.S. allies ultimately decide they need their own nuclear deterrence, would that reflect a failure of American leadership or simply a rational adjustment to a more dangerous world?
Sure. That's an important question. I'm gonna disagree just a little bit with the premise of the question. I would say it's either both or it's neither. So if there's a failure of American leadership, it is only rational for our allies to adjust, right? And that goes back to this idea of a commitment problem or an alliance reliability problem. Let's say that you're Taiwan. If you are Taiwan, can you rely on the United States to come to your aid if China indeed follows through on what it's been openly planning and preparing for decades now, which is an invasion? If you're the United States, you look at this situation and you say, well, gosh, China takes Taiwan, that would be bad, and we'd lose access to semiconductors. But do we really want to fight a nuclear war to preserve Taiwan's safety? And that's a situation that's kind of difficult. Now, this is different, I think, than the conventional defense problem. So everyone in the audience is certainly familiar with what's been going on with NATO, the idea that the Trump administration is concerned about essentially a free rider problem, that the rest of the world looks at the United States and says, oh, the United States will provide security, so we don't have to engage in arms spending. And many of you will know that NATO met in 2025 and reset its target for defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035, which, quick aside, spoiler, that will never happen, I don't think. But we can have that conversation differently. I think that nuclear weapons here are a different issue than the collective action problem issue. I don't think it's a situation where the United States actually wants other states, our alliance partners who are not already nuclear, to go ahead and build. The CBO has estimated that over the next 10 years, we will spend roughly $950 billion maintaining and upgrading our nuclear arsenal. We're going to be doing this regardless, right? We will do this regardless of what other states do. And the marginal cost of providing nuclear deterrence to another state is essentially zero for us. In other words, we have these weapons. We will be maintaining these weapons. We will be able to provide the security that these weapons can extend through extended deterrence. So I don't think the United States, I don't think that is necessarily a concern that we need to extract this from other states. And moreover, we probably don't want to, because states that rely on us for security can be coerced, as we've learned in the last 2 years, into doing other things for us, say on the trade side, etc. So if our non-nuclear allies start going it alone, it's going to be for one of two reasons. It could be because we have created doubt about our willingness to maintain prior commitments. So if you're Taiwan and you really doubt that the United States will come to your aid if China attacks, you have an incentive to develop weapons. Now, the discussion of how China would react to Taiwan trying to do something like that is separate. But that's what would create that sort of incentive. And there's some prior evidence that suggests that's possible. Certainly, that's what we see France do in the 1960s. France withdraws from NATO integrated command, develops its own, wants to have its own nuclear force. And maybe at least some of this is driven by a concern that the United States won't come through. A second concern that might drive our allies to do this is that our interests depart so significantly that they don't rely on us or don't want to rely on us. So if we coerce our allies to the point that there's insufficient shared interest to maintain the alliance, well, then yeah, we could see them try to go it alone, as it were. And again, you could tell that sort of story about de Gaulle. De Gaulle had delusions of grandeur and his view about what France's role in the world would be in the 1960s, and had some concerns about U.S. economic coercion. Giscard, as finance minister at the time, is talking about exorbitant privilege, is talking about essentially the United States manipulating a power asymmetry there. So we could talk about dynamics like that, but I think that those dynamics are pretty unlikely. I think that's not likely to happen. I think that a lot of the economic coercion that we see the United States engaged in right now, the Trump administration is using foreign economic policy, is using tariffs to strike these deals. I don't think these deals are really deals at all. I think these are photo ops largely, and I think that you will see, regardless of Republican or Democrat in the White House in the next administration, I think you'll see renegotiation. I think you will see a major reset. So I don't see that as likely, I guess, if that answers, Dr. Holland, your question. I don't see it as a situation where it's likely that the United States will engage in actions that will cause its non-nuclear allies to acquire weapons or to feel the need to acquire weapons.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I just wanted to make a maybe one comment before we move on to the next question. I was fascinated to learn that last year, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia signed a mutual defense agreement, and Saudi Arabia said, we need protection from Pakistan's nuclear umbrella. So when Iran launched ballistic missiles at Saudi Arabia this week, I noticed that the Pakistani the top officer in the Pakistani military went to Riyadh to discuss whether Pakistan needs to come to Saudi Arabia's aid against Tehran. So obviously in that situation, Saudi Arabia didn't trust the American nuclear umbrella. It turned to Pakistan. So that suggests a whole different dynamic than what at least I had expected to occur. So just turn to the next question, Steve. So Japan, let's focus on Japan for a moment. Japan has both the technical capacity and there's growing public debate among the citizens of Japan about acquiring nuclear weapons. And as we know, the new prime minister of Japan has threatened China, saying, do not even think about invading Taiwan because we, Japan, will come to Taiwan's defense. So if a crisis over Taiwan did escalate dramatically, how quickly do you think Japan could acquire nuclear weapons? And would the United States quietly accept that?
Well, so with advance notice, I did a little digging into this. I confess that the technical details are a little outside my expertise. Japan, of course, heavy nuclear industry, nuclear power, 9% of their electricity, and they're targeting 20%. So they have the reactors. Once you have the reactors, the enrichment process, they certainly have the technology to do that. And they are acquiring, I think what is more interesting than that, what is more interesting than the actual nuclear weapons themselves is the delivery capability. So in 2025, they test a short-range ballistic missile, the hypervelocity gliding projectile, Block 1. Now, Block 1 travels 300 to 600 miles. 600 miles puts it on the shore in China. They're working on Block 2 right now, which will as much as triple the range. And tripling the range of a ballistic missile puts it in mainland China. So it seems to me in technical terms, given Japanese high-end advanced manufacturing and the nuclear industry, that it's a hop, skip, and a jump, right? And it's fairly quick for them to put this together. So the question is political. And the answer to the political question goes back to the Constitution. Article 9 of Japan's Constitution has two sections. Section 1 renounces the use of war as a policy tool, which feels a little at odds with, as you say, Takaichi's statement. Paragraph 2 renounces the ability to maintain air, sea, and land forces. So they're constitutionally forbidden from even really having a military. Now, of course, we all know that they have a self-defense force, and that's been an issue that's gone on for years, right? This debate coming from the conservative end of the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan, where they say, well, gosh, we need to change the Constitution to recognize and explicitly allow the self-defense force to operate. And that might allow the self-defense force to do things like get involved in UN. Often for UN actions, Japan's sending the money, not the troops. So again, the conservative wing of the LDP has pushed for that, but has failed largely. So Abe tried to amend the Constitution. My memory for dates, a couple of years pre-COVID. And was not successful. And Abe, if anyone's going to get it done in the LDP, if anyone's conservative enough and has a strong enough power base, Abe is the longest serving LD prime minister in LDP history. But at the time, he's got a coalition partner, and his coalition partner is centrist but pacifist. So he effectively can't get it done, right? And the reason they can't get it done is domestic politics. There's not the domestic political support. If you look at the polling data in Japan, 80 to 90% of the population is against revision for paragraph 1 of Article 9. That's the one that renounces war. Now, where you're right, Ken, I think is that there's increasing support, and it depends. Polling data jumps around. There's increasing support for these changes to Article 2 about maintaining capabilities. And you see the public being increasingly willing to consider explicitly allowing what look like defense forces or what look like weapons maintenance. And this is a complex situation in Japanese politics, right? So Japan's reckoning with its pre-World War II and World War II militarism is a kind of third rail issue where you have things like the Yasukuni Shrine. You have Class A war criminals in this shrine, and so part of the country says, well, we should be able to visit the shrine, and we should be able to honor our war dead, and we should be able to honor or acknowledge and maybe even embrace parts of Japanese history. But then other parts say, gosh, you don't do this. And you have these controversies in what happens in textbooks, and I think that really represents a kind of a deep moral struggle in the public there. So the heart of your question, though, Ken, I think, is what happens when there's real violence in Taiwan? Does that shift the needle just like that? And does it do it in a way that provides the backing to get this done? I think that the answer is probably no. And I think that the reason is, again, it goes back to my answer to the first question, that would represent ultimately for Japan a decision to push back against U.S. extended deterrence. So Japan has effectively relied on the United States, since 1945 for its security, for its deterrence. Japan allowed, I guess, as part of a secret codicil to a security treaty with the United States, allowed nuclear weapons to transit its territory. We had nuclear weapons in Okinawa. Supposedly, they aren't there anymore. They weren't there after Okinawa was sort of handed back, and that there haven't been nuclear weapons in Japanese territory. But I think that Japan is probably right to rely on the U.S. security guarantee. So in other words, a decision to build on its own would be to say, we don't believe that the United States will come to our aid. And while the United States might not come to Taiwan's aid, Japan is a much more critical value. It's a much bigger economy, much more important trading partner. And the security situation changes if Taiwan goes off the table. If Taiwan, if the one China policy is realized and Taiwan comes under CCP control, Japan becomes all that much more important to the United States, right? As a producer, again, of high-end electronics, high-end materials. They're ahead of us actually in material rare earth processing. Since the Coast Guard incidents with China, they would be a source of potential chip fabs, right? If we were to lose access to Taiwan, I think that it's unlikely that this happens, because if we lose Taiwan, if the United States loses Taiwan, Japan becomes that much more important, which makes our security commitment there that much more reliable.
Thanks, Steve. And my last question is about the domino effect. Let's say one country did acquire nuclear weapons that does not have them now. One U.S. ally like South Korea, like Japan. Do you think there would be a domino effect where other non-nuclear allies in the Middle East or Europe might also feel a need to acquire nuclear weapons?
This is gonna. I'm sounding like a one-trick pony here. This is going to go back to that alliance reliability issue. So I'm going to say no, because again, we know that the United States, the CBO is planning for $1 trillion over the next 10 years. We know the United States is going to maintain its nuclear arsenal. So it's not a question of not having the capability. It's a question of alliance reliability. It's a question of, if you are that state, if you are that non-nuclear U.S. ally, do you look at the United States and say, the United States won't come to my aid? And is that feeling changed by observing another non-nuclear U.S. ally decide to engage in the production of nuclear weapons? I think the answer is no. I think it's no because um, commitments we can imagine again. We can imagine Taiwan. Taiwan. The United States is not. I don't think that the United States fights a war over Taiwan. But commitment is location specific. The United States might not fight a war over Taiwan, but we might readily fight a war over Japan. And moreover, these sort of commitment factors, as I suggested a moment ago, are somewhat dynamic. So once we start to lose potential alliance partners, each individual remaining alliance partner becomes that much more important, which means the importance of that commitment or the strength of that commitment increases. And I was thinking about a good example, and I think the best example might be Iran, right? So if we think of what happens in Iran, again, your audience is very well versed and probably knows this. U.S. support for Israel, tepid before 1973, tepid at best, right? U.S. is not a particularly great friend to Israel before the Yom Kippur War. And the United States goes sort of out of its way to play, honest broker, right? And balance a set of competing interests. And you think about it, well, why, given the United States seemingly ironclad to commitment to Israel now? And the answer is we had other we had other friendly states there, and Iran was one of them. So in the 1970s, you get Yom Kippur War, you get the Nixon resupply of the IDF in 1973. But even after that, 1978, Egypt's willing to look at the United States as an honest broker for the Camp David Accords. Everything changes starting in the 1980s. And I think at least one of the reasons is by then we've lost Iran, right? We've lost a friendly face in the Middle East, and that makes the remaining states that much more important and hence increases our commitment. So I think what I'm saying then is, is it possible that one alliance partner, non-nuclear alliance partner might say, oh, we're going to go nuclear? Sure. Or might we lose one in a conflict like Taiwan? Sure. But rather than that leading to questions about U.S. commitment and U.S. alliance reliability, that would underscore our incentives to maintain those ties and provide that blanket of extended deterrence.
Thanks, Steve. So, Ray, I'll turn over the microphone to you and let you manage the questions from the audience.
All right. Thank you, Ken. And thank you, Steve, for kind of setting the stage here. This is really some interesting information you provided. We have a question from Jim Citrick. I'm sorry, Jim, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. This was a wonderful conversation. I must say that I may show my flag or my colors by asking this question. However, in one slide I thought was particularly wonderful. You had alliances, treaties, norms as reasons why organizations or states may choose to go one way or the other with regard to nuclear weapons. But all of that is by the board when you have the United States with an irrational actor, as an irrational actor. Because treaties, norms, alliances, these, as we've seen in the last year, are increasingly, I would almost say, irrelevant to American foreign policy. So what does that say for other countries that might rely on American security and for other countries that might or might not wish to pursue nuclear weapons?
Thanks, Jim. That's a great question. That gets to the debate in international relations between sort of the realist camp on the one hand and the liberal camp, and that's liberalism, classical liberalism, not left-right U.S. liberalism. But it overlaps to some extent. And I don't have the quote in front of me. I wish I did, but yeah, Stephen Miller came out and gave the sort of the classic realist statement about international relations a couple of weeks ago. He said, not quite what the Athenians said to the Melians, but it was awfully close. He said, well, the powerful states are going to do whatever they want to do, and the weak states are going to accept it. And that's a view that says, well, these other things like norms, these other things like treaties don't constrain, right? And they don't constrain in any meaningful or effective way. Now, if that's the perspective of other states on this government, and yeah, the United States government has shown a willingness, the Trump administration has shown the willingness to retreat from the post-war order as built by the United States, either in security terms, with NATO, or in economic terms with sort of the GATT-WTO order. The United States has retreated from agreements, and then the Trump administration in particular is given to renegotiating agreements. So that's a concern. That's a concern where if I'm a state and I've negotiated an agreement with you, well, look at the United Canada and Mexico looking at USMCA, right? The Trump administration, first Trump administration negotiates that. Second Trump administration comes back and says that's the worst deal ever. We got to renegotiate it. Well, what do these deals, in a sense, really mean? Is it all just transaction? I think you're right that that's true, and that raises concerns for states, particularly when it comes to economic policy. I'm not sure that that's as concerning when it comes to foreign policy. I think that foreign security policy. I think that our interests in terms of the security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of our allies is probably a little bit less negotiable. And we will certainly use our position of power to coerce economic concessions based on that security guarantee. But it seems less likely to me that states see Trump's actions as indicative of a long-term shift of the United States security commitments. Does that speak to it a little bit, or?
That speaks to it. The people in Copenhagen might have some disagreement with your conclusion. And European Union in general, in response to that particular incident, was I thought unusually forceful for the European Union.
Yeah, I think, again, if one is a realist, right? This is sort of if you subscribe to a sort of a realist perspective on international politics, this is a cheap talk problem, right? So Trump can stand up tonight and say, the United States will go it alone for the next 100 years, and the European Union can come back and say, well, we will do the same. I think that the underlying interests remain, though, and I think that the underlying interests will dictate that. And I rather imagine that there are a lot of folks in Europe who are looking at the clock and who are imagining that the world in 3 years is going to look more recognizable than the world now. Now, political scientists are terrible at predictions, so don't come back to me in 3 years. But that's what I would think would be going on right now.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your question, Jim. As I said in my message to you, if you have a question, please let me know in the chat group there, and I'll call on you. So I sort of have a question too. There are nukes and there are nukes. They're what they call tactical nukes, I guess. I'm not sure what that means exactly. But Russia has threatened, you haven't talked about Russia yet. Russia has threatened to use them in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. Why hasn't Russia actually followed through with their threats on the use of these sort of tactical nuclear weapons?
Right. So recall that I talked about the security dilemma, this idea that you and I are neighbors. You see me building weapons. How do you feel? You feel insecure. What do? You build weapons. There we are. We're in the spiral, and we're in the spiral because we're unable to enter one another's counterfear. And now we're in this situation, are we in the scorpion in the bottle situation, or are we in the sort of delicate balance situation? I think that neighbors are much more likely to be in the scorpion in the bottle situation. I think that direct neighbors are much more likely because, if the Soviet Union, I'm always doing that. If Russia were to launch nuclear weapons, well, Ukraine's next door, and moreover, Ukraine is territory that they hope to hold. So if you irradiate it, it's probably not going to be nearly so desirable. Look at the situation. I think that the best example of this is India and Pakistan. So India and Pakistan are both nuclear, and they had a hot war, more or less, for a month or so, week and a half, last year. Now, how are they able to do this, and why doesn't this lead to nuclear escalation? Ken and I share some friends in Islamabad, and the sort of I know I reached out reached out through friends when all this was happening, and we're like, oh, are you running for the basements, running for the hills? And this will pass. And I think the reason is, when you have contiguous territory like that, the potential for nuclear fallout makes their use unthinkable. In India and Pakistan, they effectively share the Punjab, and the Punjab is responsible for, I think the figures are like 30% of the wheat in 30% of the wheat and rice in India, and the figure goes closer to 80% if you're Pakistan. So is nuclear exchange between the two actually thinkable? Probably not. And so take that to Ukraine. If you're Russia, do you use nuclear weapons? Again, I don't think so. I think that it's self-interest rather than what the scholar Nina Tannenwald would call the nuclear taboo, right? The idea that states are normatively constrained from actually using nuclear weapons. I think it's self-interest not to do that. And I think that, battlefield nuclear weapons, the idea of these frogs, these small yield nuclear explosions, I don't know that gives the Russian army much of an advantage in getting what it wants done anyway. And it's possible that at least some of what Putin wants done is a continuous fight, because that allows him to serve some domestic political goals.
Hmm. So as you're talking, I'm thinking, when is it ever going to happen? When would ever any country? It seems like we're creating a situation where nobody would ever use them under any circumstances, yet we invest billions and billions of dollars globally every year to produce them. It seems like a kind of a waste of time and money and effort to be engaged in this foolish process.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the essential argument of the security dilemma, that collectively, if we could sit back and look at one another and say, let's have a world without nuclear weapons, collectively, we all agree we'd like that world, and we'd like that world better than this one. But we live in a world without higher authority to enforce such an agreement. So, yeah, Ray, why don't you dismantle your nuclear weapons, and I'll dismantle mine, and I'll get right back to you. So that sort of situation, right? So yes, you're right. There is a collective action problem, a tragedy of the commons, whatever welfare economics concept you want to apply there. The question of whether or not they'll ever be used, that again, that depends on which of those two models you think is going to accurately capture the dynamics, right? So if you believe this sort of delicate balance of terror model, right, where you've got, lots of different actors, you've got misinformation or, signaling problems between states, you've got potential for rogues. I mean, that's long been the concern of Pakistan, right? So, the United States establishment is probably, the United States establishment is probably okay with the Pakistani military because it's the most well-functioning institution in Pakistan, and they control the nukes. But, what if a domestic group gets hold of those nuclear weapons? What if, or fissionable material? Um, I think those are the kinds of concerns that lead to, well, yeah, sure, there could be nuclear explosions. It's hard to see a state doing that. It's hard to see a state doing that because, again, the consequences are so outsized, and they are so they so far exceed the potential gain, unless you're talking about a state that's being overrun, right? Unless you're talking about Hitler's last days in the bunker, set the nuclear weapons off.
Mhm. I just have kind of maybe a technical question. And again, I encourage people to post a question here. But from a technical standpoint, is the material necessary to create a nuclear weapon readily available kind of in every country? I mean, do they all have the kind of the uranium stockpiles, or not stockpiles, but minerals that they could actually build a weapon?
Well, so if you dig enough, you're going to find uranium, right? So I was in Utah a couple of weeks ago, and the Bingham Canyon mine is just right south of Utah. If anyone, you ever get a chance to go to Salt Lake City, take a tour of that mine. It used to be the largest open pit mine in the world. It's pretty fascinating. But it's a copper mine, and guess what? You dig for copper, you're going to find some uranium, and that's probably true around the world. Where there's mining, there's going to be fissionable material coming up. So the question is, can you get enough of the fissionable material, and B, enrich it? So when you look at Iran, when you look at what Iran's been doing over the past couple of years, the question is not, do they have fissionable material? They have it. The question is, are they enriching it to weapons grade, which again is above 90%? And that's technically a little bit difficult. Now, what do we know about technology and economic growth across time? They're increasing. So what was in the 1960s, you look at the GDP per capita of India when they went nuclear, it was like $130 per capita, right? In today's dollars. And so if you have a state that's that poor, but able to do this, that tells you that there's the resource constraint is maybe not too binding, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But that's why we have the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the International Atomic Energy Agency trying to monitor who is and is not enriching, right? That's why I guess when the Israelis hit the Natanz complex, they're going after these cascading centrifuges, right? The centrifuges how they spin out hexafluoride gas, essentially, right? And so, yeah, to answer your question, it can be done, but right now you have to have enough fissionable material and the technology to do this. You have to have that. That's kind of out there. The effort is probably something that intelligence agencies are going to pick up on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. We do have a question from Jenna Wright. And then I think Jim Citrick also had a kind of a follow-up comment. But Jenna, if you want to go ahead.
Hi. Okay, thank you for calling on me, and thank you, Mr. Hall, for being here. I guess I kind of have two questions, and one of them kind of goes off of Jim's question, and I almost feel a little bit silly asking this because it just seems like the use of nuclear weapons would be so catastrophic. Like, I can't imagine any president doing that or using them. But kind of like what Jim mentioned earlier, our current president is not always considered a rational actor, and considering the fact that he kind of wants to leave his mark on history and put his name on everything, and is a little bit more like rash in decision making, I'm wondering if that is a concern. So that was kind of one of my questions, and I don't know if I have time for a second one, but maybe I'll just stick with that one for now.
Again, political scientists making predictions, never a good bet. So don't take
Fair
this out
enough.
and put money on it. But I'm pretty certain I would be very surprised, and I've been very surprised by some of the things that Trump has done. But even keeping that in mind, I would be very surprised, even shocked, if Trump were to use nuclear weapons, because the United States has a military arsenal that allows it to do all of the things that you've seen us do in the last week. So I think when you think about strategic goals, there's really not much incentive for the United States to do this. You know, unless you go for the sort of the full madman scenario, in which case there's a Christopher Walken movie called The Dead Zone from the 1980s, which kind of explores that just a little bit. I recommend it. It's entertaining. It's a little kitschy. But as a realistic scenario for what might happen in the United States, I don't see that as likely. I don't see that as likely.
Jenna, you can go ahead with your second question.
Okay, thank you for that one. Also, okay, so my second question was the United States, kind of more like recent events, the United States and Iran did have an agreement so that there could be like inspections on Iran's nuclear program. I don't remember what year that happened, but I think it was under the Obama administration, and then under the Trump administration, the first one, they pulled out of that agreement. And then a couple of weeks ago, they were trying to renegotiate something, and then now we are where we are here. From what I understand, Iran was agreeing to most of the things that we wanted them to agree to, and then we just decided not to do it. I'm not 100% sure why, and maybe I'm not even correct on that. But I'm just wondering, like, what do you think the odds are that we ever have any kind of agreement ever again? Since obviously, like, diplomacy is kind of out the window at this point. I don't know what happens from here.
Yeah, I think that raises this point that I didn't talk about, this historical information that I didn't talk about that's important, right? So in 2015, the United States signs the nuclear deal with Iran, and the sort of the key figure for that is, and I'm terrible with specific numbers. I want to say it's 3.9%. So Iran has nuclear facilities. Iran has civilian nuclear power. And when you have nuclear reactors, you have fissionable material. Iran's had this fissionable material. The question is, are they enriching it? The 2015 agreement capped them at, and again, don't quote me on the exact number, I think it's 3.6 or 3.9% enrichment. And remember, you need 90% enrichment to get weapons grade, right? To have a nuclear explosion. Once you start enriching past 60, it's only for weapons, right? You don't need that for civilian nuclear power. Yes, we had a deal in place. Yes, the Trump comes in, and I want to say 2018 says, this deal is terrible. It's a bad deal. I'm scrapping this deal. Now, if you're Iran and this deal has been scrapped, what's coming next? Well, obviously, a renegotiation is coming next. If you are going to have to renegotiate, you want to renegotiate with what? More chips on the table. So guess what Iran starts to do? They start enriching, right? Now, we don't have the counterfactual, right? We don't have the world without, with the deal still in place, and we don't know whether or not they follow through on the deal, right? And then if you want to go back to this idea of counterfear, the nightmare, if you're in the United States, or probably the nightmare more accurately if you're Israel, is that this deal exists, and somewhere in Iran, enrichment is happening, but you don't know it because you don't know where it is, right? So we know the Natanz complex, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on underground, but we don't know what's underneath the entire soil of Iran. And maybe there's another facility that they've successfully hidden. So that's the thinking is, the only way you can be sure is to, use weapons to degrade their capabilities. So there's that piece of information, and I've strayed from your question a little bit. Remind me, where am I going with the answer here?
No, that was helpful information. I was just wondering, and here I am asking you for a prediction again. What are the odds that we ever have any kind of negotiations or agreements in the future? Because it seems like that might be, I don't know, like a little bit more helpful in terms of national security? And even if we do come to an agreement, like what are the odds that the Iranian government adheres to like what we compromise on?
Sure. Well, there will certainly be negotiations and there will certainly be deals, right? The question is whether these hold, right, and are stable and bind behavior. Now, if you are the Iranians, you have learned that, negotiations will not keep you from being coerced, right? That signing a deal will not keep you from being continually coerced and even killed. And if they didn't learn that with Soleimani under the first Trump administration, they've learned that with Khomeini, the last 2 weeks. So, yes, I think that it makes it very difficult. I think ultimately, if you look at the Trump administration's response, it's based on this idea that this sort of, Stephen Miller, this very realist idea that cooperation, that deals when it comes to international security just aren't stable because I can't trust that you won't cheat, right? That you've agreed not to enrich, but somewhere out in Iran, somewhere out in a cave in a desert, somewhere where I can't find it, you'll be enriching. And I think their response indicates that sort of perspective that, we'll just bomb, right? And I think that that's certainly Israel's perspective because they live close enough to really worry about things. So no, I don't know that I'd expect a lot of successful diplomacy going into the future. I would expect a lot of monitoring. I would expect a lot of coercion followed by more coercion.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Thanks, Jenna. Jim, did you want to kind of follow up on your comment?
Yes, thank you very much. I some of the things you're saying, Dr. Hall, just make me come back to the question of what happens when or if state actor or actors are acting or behaving less rationally than you might assume, not always in their best interests, for example, or if, as has happened before, there should be an accident or miscalculation or miscommunication. I'm not arguing, I'm not saying that this means more people should get weapons. I'm saying that the fact that there are any, if you're an American ally or you think you're an American ally, can make it sort of unimaginably hard to figure out what your best course of action should be.
And I all I can say is I agree, right? So when I was a graduate student, my advisor was very much interested in the Cold War years, was very much interested in Teddy Sorensen. And so we read all the XCOM documents, we read the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if you read the Cuban Missile Crisis, one view of the Cuban Missile Crisis is, here's this mutually assured destruction, right? Dean Rusk famously says, "Oh, we're eyeball to eyeball," and the other fellow just blinked. They just turned around. Well, two scorpions in the bottle. They figured it out. Khrushchev and JFK worked something out. There's a deal. Rationality wins out, right? But when you read what actually went on, it's frightening, right? It's not, is it rationality winning out or were we famously lucky? And when I say we, I mean all of humanity, right? And to your point, yeah, because they had operational launch authority on the ground in Cuba. And not only that the Soviet commanders on the ground had it, Castro wanted to use it. And he said so. He said so at a conference with McNamara afterwards. So if you're asking me, is it possible for there to be an actor that says, push the button? Absolutely. Absolutely. The one little bit of pushback I'll give you, again, goes back to this idea of inability to enter counterfear. So, what do we think of the Kim family in North Korea, right? What words do we use to describe Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Il, Kim Jong Un, right? It's the classic, they're madmen and this and that, right? And they're irrational actors. Another book tip for you, there's a great one about Kim Jong Il. He's a big film buff, so he kidnaps his favorite South Korean director and actress, and holds them prisoner and has them make movies. Certainly, someone like that is crazy, right? Is a madman, and a madman will press the button. So, from that perspective, so you say, okay, well, gosh, here's your clear example. You've got North Korea, you've got this seemingly deranged family that loves motorboats and cognac and South Korean actors and will do anything, right? But they've stayed in power for 3 generations. And if you can stay in power for 3 generations in South Korea, where people get killed fairly frequently, including people with a family name, you've got to be doing something quote unquote right? You've got to be at least instrumentally rational in some way, if morally detestable in other ways. There is that desire for survival there. So I think it is the check, Jim, that I'm hopeful for is that when we talk about states, what it takes to come to power and hold power and stay in power in a state is an actor that is not crazy, right? That is reasonably rational. Even Saddam Hussein, right? Saddam Hussein, madman, right? Gaddafi, madman. Well, they stayed in power, and they stayed in power for decades, which means they were able to set goals and choose means that lead to those goals that ensure their survival. And I think it's that pressure for rationality at the state level that gives me hope. Then the fear, of course, is, well, what if terrorist group, splinter group, et cetera, gets hold of fissionable material? And I don't have a way to assess the probability there.
All right. Thanks, Jim. So, Steve, imagine you have omnipotent power. What would you do to kind of get rid of nuclear arms in the world today? How do you think this process could happen? I mean, if we look, and we've been pretty lucky here for the last 70 years. What's going to happen over the next 70 years? Is there a process that nations could engage in to say, all right, we realize this is a foolish errand that we're on. How do we step back from this and start dismantling all these nuclear weapons that we have in place?
I'm not going to give you a very satisfying answer, unfortunately. All right. So if my prediction is for 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, my prediction will be that if we hop in the way forward machine and hop out there, we're going to see nuclear weapons, and we're going to see that the same states that have nuclear weapons now will have them ahead. Because we only have one example, just the one, South Africa. South Africa in 1999 takes its weapons apart. Now, is there a clue there, a hint, a guide? Maybe. What's South Africa up to in 1989? You've got the fall of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union's no longer supporting stuff in Angola, right? So that there's no longer the South Africa's no longer worried about Angola. There's a split they split up Angola and Namibia. So the security threat for South Africa subsides. But also, when you look at the nuclear weapons that South Africa had, they were really clunky, right? They were so big that they were not able to be delivered by air, right? You've got nuclear devices, but you can't drop them as bombs, and they're not even reliable enough to military standards to be used. So they really didn't have a lot of incentive to keep them, right? Even if they had security threats, they wouldn't be much of a deterrent. So first part of the answer is we only have the one example, and it's not a great one for states dismantling weapons. If I could sort of wave the magic omnipotence wand, you talk about realist assumptions about how the world works and how this creates sort of these problems of cooperation, information problems, right? So if we could perfectly observe Iran, right? If we had omnipotent ability to see what's happening on the ground in Iran and underneath the ground, we probably wouldn't need to coerce them ever again, right? We could know, if we could know with certainty that they are not enriching uranium, right? Then no need for coercion. And then when we see them enriching uranium, we go in and do something about it. If you allow for that sort of surveillance capability, maybe. And so, one could, I guess, say, well, gosh, surveillance technology is getting better. We've got cameras everywhere. We've got AI. We've got satellites, all this sort of stuff. I think still there's too much uncertainty. I think there's still too much uncertainty for that check to work. Short of that, I don't see any state giving up their weapons, because I'll only do it if you'll do it, and vice versa. And who's there to enforce us following through on their agreement? And once the two of us have put our nuclear weapons down, Jim over there is going to pick his up, and now he's going to start coercing us. So I think that we are likely stuck where we are, right? As is often the case with technology. Once technology arrives, it very rarely departs.
Well, you were right about one thing. That was a dissatisfying answer.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. It was probably an impossible question to answer anyhow. Well, I really do appreciate you giving us some really great information tonight and some insights into kind of the thinking behind, how countries view their use of or their possession of nuclear weapons. And so I really do want to thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Betty, and she's going to close us out for the evening, I think. Go ahead, Betty.
Thank you, Ray, for, as always, that great moderation with the public. And Steve, thank you very much for making it all the way down from Muncie to join us this evening. We love this Zoom capability, being able to bring in speakers like yourself that really are a distance, and allowing us to really expand our reach to bring in the type of expertise we want on these topics. And this is a timely one and urgent, and I appreciate so much. You were very frank. These aren't always the answers we want to hear, but there's nothing rosy about this. And so thank you very much for sharing that. And Ken had to leave early. He had another engagement. I want to remind our audience that we have 2 programs left in our Great Decision Speaker Series. I want to thank you. Some of you have hung in with us from the very beginning. We've tried this in different ways over the years. And the last couple of years, we've only concentrated February and March on the Great Decisions, which is still once a week for two solid months. But some of you might remember when we were trying to do Global Speaker Series on top of that, we were oversaturating you with urgent and timely issues. It was just too much. Next week, on Wednesday, the 18th, we are talking about multilateralism and a new world order. There is a theme to this year's topics. And it's a fascinating theme. And I think next year is going to sort of be bringing this thread together. Where does all this leave us? We've talked about almost all of our programs. We've talked about the alliances and the steps that have been made, the continued threat of the nuclear capabilities you discussed this evening, although we're the only ones that have really used that nuclear capability in a horrific and grand way. But it's also led to multilateralism, sort of a forced discussion among people, and that's really being shattered into a new world order right now. What does that look like? We have a fantastic speaker who's been with us before, Frank O'Donnell, who has spent years with the United Nations, and I know he was a resident representative, which is the equivalent of being an ambassador. The UN, however, calls it resident representative in Ukraine and as well as other countries. He's still a major feature on the European stage, a number of workshops, panels, and discussions, and mostly he's a very dear old friend of mine. We both worked for the United Nations, and he was early on in his career in Lesotho. I sort of call him my little brother because I was a few years older than him. And then we end the month on the 31st of March on Tuesday with U.S. engagement with China. China is sort of, it's never in the background, but of all the issues that we're dealing with right now, China is just sort of sitting there for us. We're watching them and they us. And we have, again, another wonderful expert, Dr. Mary Gallagher, from Notre Dame University. And we'll hear about both of their backgrounds. And we're going to end this evening with a very special opportunity with the Indiana Council of World Affairs of the Embassy of Moldova. We're very excited about this. And Janet, would you like to tell us about this?
Well, thank you, Betty. I'm very happy to share that we will have an in-person gathering to visit one-on-one with the ambassador from Moldova, who's Vlad Kolminsky. And we're working on this with additional organizations. We really want to bring out a good crowd to show the hand of friendship to the ambassador. Moldova is a very interesting country in that it's really in a position to be in a tug and pull between the West and the East. With the fall of the Soviet Republic, Moldova claimed its independence. It's held an election in 2020 and 2024 where reformist Mia Sandu won. And it's believed that the win happened primarily because of diaspora votes. And what that means is the people who had fled the country because of impoverished conditions in the country voted from outside the country and to get a reformist in there. Vlad Kolminsky is educated at Syracuse University. He has a master's degree in public policy, and also he has a master's degree from the Central European University in Budapest. He's done a lot of work with peace building, negotiations, and one of the things that really caught my eye about his work is that he worked on the United Nations Black Sea Grain Initiative that averted the threat of famine in lower income countries. You might remember that the negotiation resulted in the transport of grain through the Black Sea so that the grain could be used around the world to very poor countries. This shows how diplomacy can make a difference in people's lives and how public policy can make a difference. He's a career leader in peace building, and we'll be with him at the Fisher's Library. It's a free event. There's no charge. It starts at 5 and will span till 7 p.m. We will have refreshments there. And Steve, we hope you'll be able to come down to Fisher's. Good. We already have something. We'll open the registration later tonight. But are people familiar with Moldova? I know Jane has traveled there. So it's a very pretty country based with agriculture, but it's an example of where an impoverished nation, because of the industriousness of its citizens, is pulling itself towards prosperity and industry within their country. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. Jane has been working on this along with Peter Kirkwood from the International Center and Ray and Cynthia Miller, who's on the board. Did you want to add any comments, Jane?
Well, I just noticed that someone in the chat asked what the date was. And so I'll just re-emphasize the date is April 6th. It's Monday, April 6th at the Fisher's
What
Library.
time? What time?
It's the doors open at 5. The program starts at 5:45 and will go to 7. And then there'll be an opportunity to go to dinner after.
Right. Yeah, so we want to extend the fellowship. We'll be
Okay, when
going
you
to
say
4-day
opportunity
Ray.
to go to dinner, is that kind of like if you'd like to informally, we're not having a formal dinner, is that right? This is an informal, if you're there and when a bunch of people want to go to dinner, is that what you mean?
Sure.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's to expand the fellowship and also talk about these topics at hand. And we're all examining what does a new world order mean and how's it going to affect our lives and the lives of our families. So it's just an opportunity to get together, and we hope you'll take advantage of it.
We're very excited because we were actually approached to do this. And I think the ICWA has changed quite a lot with some of you who are still on. we're 75 years old, and we're part of an organization that's over 100 years old, started after World War I. I don't know, Steve, do you know much about the World Affairs Council of America?
No, no.
Well, that started along with the Foreign Policy Association after World War I. I used to start all of our programs with giving this brief history. It's like, Betty, knock it off. People are tired of the history professor. Only history professors like to hear other history professors talk about history and drone on. But there's some great history, and we started it because, remember, we were an isolationist country, a determination to be so, and particularly with the Civil War, we just were wore out. We didn't want to be engaged in those European wars, and so there was a reluctance, but we got involved in World War I reluctantly the last year. And we came out of it realizing we're sort of on the world stage. Didn't mean to be, but we were. And of course, this suited Woodrow Wilson because he was a globalist. But we had an ill-prepared public. And this was also a time, you might remember from your history, of yellow journalism. And this was, if we think that social media is creating wild journalism now, the yellow journalism of the day was just totally unchecked and unregulated, and writing all manner of whatever they wanted to write unchecked. And so what the World Affairs Councils of America or the Foreign Policy Association were trying to do was to provide, as we do right now, credible forums of credible speakers like this evening speaker, to say things of coming from research, coming from expertise, and but it appealed to a sort of an elitist audience, and some of us our oldest people on the board have been 10 years, and we've really tried to lift the organization to a new level to include younger people in school. We have the very active Academic World Quest. We'd like to find a program where we can engage university students. They're a little more challenging because they're very transient, unlike high school students, at least they're there with their parents for 4 years. So we can work with them for at least that period of time. But we are trying to really reach out, and we've worked really hard with our programs. And so to be asked to be a part of this is a real acknowledgement to, I think, the ICWA, in terms of we're leaving a nice stamp that we want to be involved with this. And we love, of course, our partnership with the International Center in Indianapolis. And it's just been really terrific. And it's a very working board.
We're very glad that you could join us this evening, and look forward to next week.
Yep.
Again, the topic is going to be multilateralism. Thanks,
very much. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for coming. Thank you for